So I was doing some poking around on the old inner tube and I ran across Libertarian Austin Petersen, and he is presenting a concept he's calling National Libertarianism. Austin has put together a website that essentially deals with the whole uh, concept he's throwing out there. It's most, I would call it an overview, but what I want to do is go over what he said and kind of intersperse and give you some ideas of what comes to mind when I'm reading some of this stuff. So, what I'm going to do is when I'm reading the stuff that is actually Austin Peterson's words, I'm going to flash up Austin Peterson there. Obviously, the way I read, I may occasionally change a few words here and there, but I'm not going to change the meaning of things. The only reason is it's a quirk of the way I read. I read far faster than the way the words come out. And what ends up happening is I get so far ahead of the text that I kind of start throwing in synonyms rather than using the actual words. Uh, Messed up my kids when I was reading them bedtime stories. So let's get into this. The collapse and the opportunity. For too long, libertarianism has been a beautiful philosophy stranded in the clouds. It debated purity while losing power. It praised freedom in theory while surrendering it in practice. The Libertarian Party became a clown car of fringe radicals and unserious thinkers, mocked even by those who once loved it. And I could agree pretty much with what he's saying here. Libertarians, for the most part, are very power adverse. They fear power. Had some fun elections where I actually had to tell various candidates that they really didn't have to worry about getting elected with the amount of resources we had available, and they were terrified about. I mean, there were candidates who actually wanted to call the press and either beg people not to vote for them or drop their candidacy because they were in such fear that the powerful words of the Libertarian Party would reach people's ears and people would swamp to them. And like, you didn't have no worries, folks. You're filling a hold a line holding position. So, and I think to paraphrase, I think what Austin's saying here is people with power are never going to hand over power to a good idea. And I think um, a lot of Republicans are the same way. They don't really know how to wield power, they don't know how to fight. So, pretty much agree here. Meanwhile, the populist tide of MAGA, messy, raw, and undeniably patriotic, prove that millions of Americans still crave liberty, even if they don't call it by that name. They despise bureaucracy, globalism, and the arrogance of Washington. They love enterprise, faith, and flag. MAGA revealed something libertarians forgot, that liberty cannot live without loyalty. A nation that despises itself cannot be free. A people ashamed of their heritage cannot defend their rights. Um, I pretty much agree with this. I see rights as being a product of our heritage. People who are too cool to be patriotic lack the fervor to defend rights, or at least the rights that matter. Libertarian nationalism arises from this realization. It does not reject the populist revolt of Trump or the moral courage of Milei, Argentinian president. It completes them. It takes their energy and weds it to the principle, order, and the philosophy. We are not anarchists. We are not pacifists. We are not nihilists. We are Americans, and we are libertarians who have learned that liberty without discipline is suicide. Part two, what libertarian nationalism is and what it's not. To know who we are, we must first say we are not. Libertarian nationalism rejects the delusion of stateless utopia. Civilization demands law. Freedom without structure is chaos. The anarchist may dream of markets without borders, but without a nation strong enough to defend them, markets burn. And this is similar to something I've been saying where I believe rights stem from liberal nationalism. Obviously, I do believe rights are God given, so you're born with them. They exist whether the government acknowledges them or not. But in practice, for your God given rights to work, there must be a national government there that's respecting the existence of those rights. And from what we've seen of history, the only nations that actually have these rights meaningfully are nations that are listic, those practices nationalism. Lots of times I hear libertarians talking about these like tribes or collectives or communes or almost I won't say prehistory, but very early history isolated settlements. And in all honesty, people in those structures are only as free as the strongest individual or clique wills it to be. So if your little group has a little Lenin in it, you'll be a horrible place. A nation, and yeah, I won't get into that because there's a lot of theory when you get to low economic stuff like that. A nation state founded on the concept of liberal national origins has rights as an integral element close to the center of the establishment. And one of the things I've been saying is one of the reasons why our country has drifted so far off is because our establishment has become globalist rather than nationalist. A nationalist elite looks at its citizenry as themselves. Maybe the citizenry is a lower class version of themselves, but it's still themselves. So therefore, there's a lot to be done for their benefit. A globalist establishment doesn't look at their citizens as part of them in any shape or form. It looks at the elites in the other nation states as part of. We also reject the pacifism that hides behind the non aggression principle. The NAP is a fine moral sentiment, but a terrible governing rule. Nations that refuse to act until attacked soon vanish from the map. Liberty must strike some first sometimes to survive. Okay, so I'm agreeing with the general sentiment here. I'm finding Petersen's expression of this off a bit and just part of, and I get into this, I'll talk about it later, but this is one of the areas where I'm finding it hard to understand who he's targeting with his words. But back to where I agree, foreign nations have interfered with the US and its interests from before we were even a country. When we were founded as a nation, when we were weak, and when we were strong. At all points, other nations were willing to interfere with the progress of the United States in one shape or form or another. The nature of the world, if you live in isolation, the world still won't leave you alone. And I have talked to a lot of libertarians that seem to believe that if the United States somehow demilitarized and became isolationist, the rest of the world would just go, oh, well, we could just since they're not a threat to us, we'll go off and do our own thing. I think that's naive at best. Libertarian foreign policy barely qualifies as a sketchbook of ideas. However, I'm kind of concerned here, at least with this sketch that Austin Petersen has put out. His statement sounds more like a blank check. I agree with the sentiment, but I think it needs some fill. Finally, we reject the cultural hedonism that consumed modern libertarianism, the obsession with fringe causes and moral relativism. A society that cannot tell right from wrong cannot be free. And I agree with this. This has always been an area where I had a hard time getting my brain around freedom and moralism. And I think Dave Smith did a really good job here talking about drugs, where it's like, well, yeah, war on drugs is awful, but obviously we've seen, but with just unleashing drug addicts on a city does to a city, it's not right that a person using drugs has the ability to essentially destroy all public spaces that everybody pays for equally, and except for the drug addicts. So I see that's where he's coming from here. Again, this could probably use a little bit of fill, but I don't disagree with anything here. Libertarian nationalism stands for order, property, family, merit, and a nation it honors, and a nation that honors its founders who built the Republic of Laws and the pioneers who expanded it across the continent. It embraces decentralization without surrendering unity. It loves peace but will never kneel before those who despise civilization. And yeah, the critical element here is it's always been kind of a fight in the Libertarian Party to put the family at the core of civilization. We tend to want it to be the individual, but the thing is, the individual doesn't drive civilization forward, it's the family. Now, the other problem that comes from the Libertarian Party is uh, they're constantly trying to wedge in non traditional families into this concept. And there is no civilization that can be built on non traditional family. So, yeah, the family is the core. You don't have civilization without it. You must protect the family at all costs. Part 3, the Libertarian Nationalist Code. We believe in these principles: liberty rooted in moral strength, not indulgence; a nation bound by shared ideals, not tribal division; government that governs least but defends best; free enterprise as a lifeblood of human dignity; the Constitution as the covenant of our civilization; borders as guardians of sovereignty; families as the foundation of liberty; property rights as sacred and enforceable; civilization over barbarism without apology; leadership through merit, courage, and service. This is not theory, it is a creed to live by, fight for, and pass to our children. For the most part, no issues here. Actually, that's pretty clear and concise. Uh, yeah, nothing to clarify there. Part 4, policy prescriptions for a free and strong republic. Libertarian nationalism is not a spectator's philosophy, it is a government agenda, excuse me, a governing agenda for the restoration of the American Republic. Government and law: sunset outdated federal agencies and return powers to the states; require every major regulation to be explicitly authorized by Congress; relocate departments out of Washington to break the Beltway monopoly; end civil service tenure that shields incompetence from accountability; audit every federal agency; abolish those failing constitutional review. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. There's nothing there you can disagree with. Economy and independence: pursue sound money and balanced budgets; cut corporate welfare and foreign aid before touching a dime of earned income; decouple critical industries, energy, medicine, and semiconductors from China; promote onshoring and hemispheric trade with trusted allies like Argentina or even India as being preferable to China; replace the income tax with a simplified consumption based system. And this is probably an area that's still being contested heavily in the libertarian sphere, but it's an area where I do agree with Austin on. He's recognizing that free market mechanisms can be thwarted by nations such as China. They are willing to impoverish their people in order to gain dominance. Okay? You can't expect single American companies to be a front line in a war with a foreign power. The free market is the benchmark. However, if you have a free market, it doesn't compel other countries to comply with its system. Raw power from abroad has the power to warp the free market just as much as domestic regulation. And although I am very much a free trader, I also recognize that uh, not a, if everyone's not playing by the same game, you don't always get the benefits. Culture and education. Reinforce the family as a central institution of liberty, abolish federal involvement in education, return it to its parents and localities, end funding for ideological nonprofits and activist NGOs, protect children from sexual exploitation and gender experimentation, celebrate Western civilization in schools rather than apologize for it. And this is an area where I have not like a great issue with it other than things seem there's a little bit of openness to this. I would define Western civilization and how the U.S. fits into it. Uh, I mean, that which is ill-defined will be actively defined by people with malfeasance on their mind. Um, One thing I would say is actively thwart or end NGOs uh, that counter Western civilization. Um, I'm thinking that the whole general NGO thing is a bad thing from the get go. Uh, it's born of people who want to do things outside the auspices of government rules and regulations. And although it creates you get some expedience out of it in some cases, I think for the most part, NGOs are going to end up going bad no matter what. So it might be better to get rid of all of them rather than play around with what ones function and don't function. Immigration and sovereignty. Secure the border with technology, manpower, and law. Make English the official national language. Eliminate dual citizenship for elected officials. Require civics proficiency for all naturalization applicants. Suspend entry from nations that sponsor or excuse terrorism. And I would add to this that we might want to go back to the original concepts of nation of natural origin quotas. Uh, just if it was that the amount of people let in every year had to essentially meet the percentage of the type of people who already are here. Like at that time, it would have been like 4% of the nation were Italians, so therefore only 4% of the immigrants would be Italians. Something active, uh, because otherwise we end up with what we got now again. Defense and foreign policy maintain the most powerful military on earth, but deploy it only for the defense of our people and our civilization, end the forever wars and globalist adventurism, strengthen alliances that defend our liberty, withdraw from those that do not, reject both isolationism and empire, prepare for new theaters of conflict in cyber wait, I think it's supposed to be cyberspace, space, and economics. Uh, Libertarian nationalism aims not for utopia, but for stability, prosperity, and moral clarity. Yeah, pretty much agree there. America First Civilization United. Some accuse us of contradiction. How can we be nationalists and international allies at once? The answer is simple because civilization is a team sport. We support Israel, not out of sentimentality, but because it stands as a shield between barbarism and the West. It fights the same enemies that once sent pirates to the shores of Tripoli. It upholds the same principles of law, industry, and individual conscience that define our civilization. Okay, so in this age, uh, you really need to be looking at the audience out there. Uh, as this is stated, I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with the underlying idea. I'm disagreeing with the way it's stated. And at best, This is bad marketing. At worst, it sounds like national cuckery. Uh, no other nation gets the Israel treatment in this manifesto. By singling it out, it really makes the rest of the manifesto look weak. Um, as written, it's a blank check. In my opinion, now Israel and the United States have essentially become intertwined by history. A combination of the fact that they're in desperate need of survival, and we're the ones who can provide that survival, creates a system where they want to influence us in a way that no other country is as motivated to do, and creates issues. Some of this is by design, some of this is just by the way the events have played out. This intertwining of Israel and the United States has a globalist and a nationalist nexus, which is why it's prominent in the political sphere. It's the existence of Israel isn't just about Israel, it's also about it's one of the battlegrounds the globalists and the nationalists are fighting over. So Israel succeeding or failing has nothing to do with Western civilization. If Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank all suddenly disappeared tomorrow, the impact on Western civilization would barely be a ledger transaction. Two-state solutions are the globalist plan for the denationalization of Israel. Israel becoming an independent entity is victory for nationalism in the United States. I'm firmly convinced that Trump's Abraham Accords are the stepping stone to detangling Israel and the United States from each other, and making Israel capable of taking care of its own security. I also believe that the current actions in Iran are being done for the exact same reason, although I do reserve judgment on the efficacy of this current endeavor. But our loyalty is first and last to America. America first means that every alliance must serve the defense of our people. Israel deserves our friendship when that friendship strengthens the free world and deters radical Islam. When it does not, we owe them honesty and not blank checks. And this is where I think what you were saying before, oops, sorry, what you were saying before doesn't jive. You're still making it a blank check, even though you're saying you're not. Okay, allies are not friends. Alliances between weak parties and strong parties are always transactional from the weak party's perspective. Their survival is on the line. If a stronger party gives them a better deal or any kind of better deal comes along, they would leave us. Never look back, never say sorry, never say thank you. And this isn't an Israel bashing thing. Any country in that position would do the same thing. The United States, in that position, would do the same thing. If you are a nationalist entity that loves your nation, which by default loves your people, you take the best deal available. And so it's not that I'm smacking on Israel on this. I'm saying any country in that position would be the exact same spot. So you're turning them into this warm, furry entity when we're actually working a transaction. And I think we need to approach it transactionally because it'll pull this emotional sentimentality you've kind of interjected, maybe unintentionally, into this. And from a marketing standpoint, would make this work a lot better with people who would be interested in looking at what you got to say. A free people has no duty to spread democracy by force, yet we have a moral right to stand beside those who refuse to be slaughtered by savages. The choice is not between empire and retreat, but between civilization and chaos. Um, I think this needs a lot of expansion. I see what you're saying, and I agree, but I think to a certain extent, this requires the implementation of spheres of influence. If the world is our sphere of influence, we probably won't succeed at this. It's too much to do. Libertarian nationalist foreign policy doctrine. America's military exists to defend our people, our allies, in civilization, and our interests. We reject isolationism and globalism alike. Strength with restraint. We support Israel's right to exist and defend itself as a fortress of Western civilization. We oppose funding any state or movement that seeks America's destruction. We engage abroad only when it secures liberty at home. Once again, I see this as some good sentiment, but it also reads like a blank check and also sounds cucky. Sorry, there's no other way to say it. Um, I mean, there's a way to talk about Israel that doesn't sound like you're watching the action from a chair in the corner of the bedroom. Civilization without apology. Libertarian nationalism refuses to apologize for progress, conquest, or civilization itself. We know that Western civilization, for all its sins, remains the greatest force for freedom in human history. Not much to say there. That's good. It's going to take a lot to reverse the propaganda that's come out, but yeah, that's on the nose. That's good. Modern libertarians infected by leftist guilt have adopted the language of our enemies. They tear down statues, sneer at our founders, and praise tyrants abroad because it feels rebellious. But rebellion without virtue is decay. That's really good right there. I fully agree with that. And you can kind of see that happening in the libertarian movement. This whole glo- definite globalist infections into the philosophy and leftist. Um, I'm wondering because I remember one of the first things I saw when I got in the Libertarian Party is there was a Washington reenactor who came out and performed Washington's farewell speech. And guy was pretty good, looked decent. His delivery was fantastic. And several times as he was giving his speech, the crowd of libertarians spontaneously started yelling 4 more years. And it was really sweet. The reenactor looked clearly, he gushed. You could see the smile on his face like he wasn't expecting such a reaction. That was probably either 96 or 2000. I'm wondering if you get the same thing out of this current Libertarian Party. I think they're so infected with leftism that I don't think they would even think of the idea of bringing a Washington reenactor in front of the group. We honor the founders in full. Jefferson's ideal of an empire of liberty, Hamilton's insistence on national strength, Washington's warnings against entangling alliances, but also his readiness to lead army when liberty was threatened. Very good. That's solid prose. People can get their minds around that. Yeah. Libertarian nationalists reject secessionism and despair. We believe in a united America that expands freedom, not fractures it. We dream not of breaking away, but breaking through, of adding new states, new frontiers, and new worlds. Okay, a little murky. Uh, Now, expansion itself is not a bad thing. But you also kind of have to be aware of the whole kind of Christianized heathens ethos here. Adding non Western or socialist voting stock to our midst is potential, it has a high potential for destabilizing the political balance. And I see high risk here. So this is something that needs coaching, I guess. Um, you don't want it in the think of the delicate balance the US went through pre-Civil War trying to maintain order by ensuring that you didn't counterbalance by bringing in uh, too many senators from one side of the main issue of the day or the other. Here, I can't think of too many entities outside the US that wouldn't keep basically pushing things in the wrong direction. But that's just a thought here. It's not a huge issue. Our manifest destiny is not dead. It extends to the seas, the stars, and the digital frontier. A free civilization must always build, explore, and dare. Stagnation is death. Fully agree here, and this is probably one of the areas where I have my strongest uh, attachments to the Trump administration. They're clearly trying to step away from this whole managed decline concept. The idea of we're just preparing the holes we're all going to crawl into and die. They're actually looking at the future. Gosh, you look at what NASA's doing. It's mind-boggling the difference between the leadership there and previously. The birth of a new libertarianism. In Trump's first administration, not a single declared libertarian sat in his cabinet. That failure was not his fault, it was ours. We had thinkers, not leaders, philosophers, not generals. I This is partially true. Okay, what you're saying is accurate in far as our side, but not as side Trump's side. Okay, Trump's first term, he won with no thought to libertarians, so they did not equate into his political thought. Now, Trump's philosophy is a little bit hard to peg. He doesn't really have one, but I think the best way to describe Trump is as a progressive nationalist, probably the most accurate. He did not notice libertarians on his first term because he didn't need us. He thought we were too insignificant to mess with. Now he noticed libertarians the second time around because we were identified on the list of voters who cost him the 2020 election. Whether that's true or not is irrelevant. That's what he believed. Angela McArdle was the only one who was bright enough to do something with this. Now, with 2020 vision, maybe we should have asked for a little bit more, but no grief on her. What she did was absolutely outstanding. When you have Megalodon on the hook, sometimes you don't know who has who. Milei proved what happens, Argentinian president. I mean, I'm saying that because I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. Uh, Milei proved what happens when a libertarian decides to lead. He took the torch of liberty and set fire to a corrupt establishment. He reminded the world that ideas are nothing without courage. And Malay, I mean, I'm thrilled with what's going on there. And actually, every time he succeeds, it gives libertarians everywhere a little bit more ammo to succeed. He's in kind of a unique situation because their government, when they have enough power in parliament, makes the presidency even more powerful. Their presidency is more powerful than ours, the United States is. So you can't think of it as a comparison, but you can do the nod and say, yeah, he's helping out the whole movement worldwide. Now the torch passes to us. Libertarian nationalism calls for a new generation of liberty leaders, doers, not talkers, people who build companies, raise families, win elections, and take responsibility. The era of think tank libertarians is over. The era of libertarian statesmen begins. This movement is not a retreat from principle, but a return to purpose. It is Jefferson's dream fortified by Hamilton's structure. It is individual liberty defended by national strength. It is localism bound by loyalty to a civilization worth saving. Section 8, the call to the vanguard. It is time for the time for theory is ended, the age of action begins. The libertarian nationalist movement will not wait for permission from the old guard. We will take the field, organize, and win. We will infiltrate the Republican Party where it can be saved and build new institutions where it cannot. We will raise candidates, fund creators, teach craftsmen, and forge families. So I'd ask, where does Thomas Massey fit into this? Infiltration only works with allies. Now, right now, Massey seems to be pretty much persona non grata, at least amongst the mega wing of the party. If X would be any indication of things, and the fact that Trump has strangely endorsed a candidate who was anti-MAGA. So is Thomas Massey somebody a national libertarian should want to emulate or not emulate? If so, differentiate between a Massey libertarian and a national libertarian. Mega populists need to believe libertarian nationalism is consistent with what they want. The current treatment of Massey says the libertarian label is not fitting in with MAGA. And just, yeah, it's because I obviously I think Massey's great, but at least somebody in MAGA doesn't. So how do we reconcile that? This is not a call to purity, but to power, the moral power to govern ourselves and defend our posterity. The founders fought a revolution not to end authority, but to reclaim it from tyrants. We must do the same. Liberty is not a spectator sport. It demands warriors, builders, and believers. There you go. I have no issues with most of the sentiment here. Some of the exact verbiage is a little clanky. Having followed Austin for a while, I tend to think that what he has in mind is probably good. The problem is, I'm not entirely sure who this is for. Who is this outreach aimed at? It sounds like something the GOP would either lie about or at some level believe it already is. It sounds like the GOP fallback marketing position. I could see somebody like Lindsey Graham saying stuff like this on a campaign commercial. Not really meaning it though, because he's appealing to the mom and apple pie segment of the population. So, not fully understanding who the target audience here makes it a little bit hard for me to evaluate what impact it would have. It's way too thin for policy wonks. And it sounds a little bit too much like the apple pie side of the GOP to get people to say, hey, that's so different than what the GOP is saying that we need to head that way. So I'm going to keep following AP and I'm going to keep an eye out to see if I get some clarifications on this stuff because basically this is really my first read through. So I'll let you know what I find out. So in the comments below, have you heard this libertarian nationalism thing mentioned outside me mentioning it in a couple videos earlier? Uh, if you know about what Austin Peterson's been talking about, where do you see it lining up with what I've been saying versus what he's saying? Uh, do you think is it a good direction to go? Uh, I I'm not saying I've been following every single word Austin Petersen has said. I follow him amongst dozens of other people I follow. So when I see something I like, I read it. When it looks a little too blah blah blah, I go past it. So I'm going to be spending more time looking at it. But is the Austin Petersen of today the same Austin Petersen we had back in 2016? Do you think his creds are still solid? Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithms brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, check out my other titles. I'm sure you're going to find things you like. You should subscribe. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.